Ladies and gentlemen, cats and dogs, boys and girls, today we have a great album that we're going to cover here on Classic Rock Revisited. And we're going to be talking about the boss, Bruce Springsteen, and one of his most iconic albums, Born in the USA. And to talk about this album, I've brought in a Bruce Springsteen fan, somebody who knows way more than I do about this man, and that's Ryan Woodhams. So, Born in the USA, it was released in 1984, and it was one of the biggest albums at the time. Had 7 top 10 singles, and sold 30 million copies in the U.S. I think as of 2012. And the two things that this album's most known for is being a vocal criticism of America while also celebrating it. The website Consequence of Sound said, it seems to argue that one can both love America and rage against its brokenness. And also, you got that iconic album cover and all those huge singles. So, Ryan, what was your first exposure to this album and Bruce Springsteen as a whole?
My first exposure to this, well, they were simultaneous because this was the first album that I had heard by Bruce Springsteen. Uh, in its, the first full-on album that I started to listen to, and it was several years ago actually. And I'd always grown up as someone who had a lot of passion for our country, our country's history, and for kind of having the acknowledgement that there's this country is far from perfect. There's always places we can improve, always things that can be improved for our people, for economy across the board. But that when at the end of the day, there's no place I'd rather grow up, no place I'd rather call myself a citizen. And I think that a lot of the um, very sort of the Americana infused um, tracks that come in through this particular album. I think that there's something that there's such a different message with every one of them, which is just emblematic of Bruce in general. And it's very easy to find one that if you can't relate to in the moment, you have related to at some point in your life.
Yeah, I love that like small town feel that he brings out in his music. Just growing up in a small town, and or maybe even a place where you've just been your entire life, and wanting to kind of move past that and triumph through all the adversity that you have. And I actually hadn't listened to Bruce Springsteen much until the last couple weeks. Obviously, "Born to Run" I think is one of the best songs like ever. So I that was kind of like where I entered into his discography. And then I listened to "Born in the USA," and at first I thought that it was a good album overall, but it was very like had great songs at the beginning and the end, but didn't quite do it for me in the middle. But the more I listen to it, I think the more I see how it's a really solid album, and it's definitely one that's very influential on music history.
I like we'll obviously get into this when we start getting into the tracks one by one, but I think that you talk about structure of an album. I think that the bookend tracks of this one, the first one on the first side and the last one on the second side, I don't think that they could have chosen a better opening song and a better concluding song out of the tracks that went onto this album.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree. I think this is one of the best paced albums that I've heard. Also, just like every track transitions into the next track very well, and it has a really good pace and energy to it. But it also has some somber moments and some like kind of reflective songs as well. So without further ado, let's just dive into the track by track breakdown. And first, we have the title track, "Born in the USA."
My first exposure to Born in the USA was actually it was funny because I was doing a summer program a couple years ago for pre-law, and we had gone to a Mets Phillies game, and we were at Citizens Bank Park, and this song came on, and I said, "This sounds like Bruce Springsteen." I had never heard this track before. As much as I was a Bruce Springsteen fan at the time, but I had not heard this specific track before. And I'm not sure how that happened, but it it got stuck in my head right away. Just the chorus, just resonated. And I went back and I looked up some of the history of, the sort of anti-war theme of the song, and listened to some of the lyrics in more depth, because obviously you're on a stadium loudspeaker with 14,000 or 40,000 screaming Philadelphia fans around you. It's kind of hard to hear much of anything, but I was able to get more in depth with what the message of the song was, and understand the sort of trials of a returning veteran that are being described in the song and detailed in the lyrics, and it just brought into mind kind of a more personal feel of what some of those heroes who come back, what their realities are. And I think that it's a song that it was written for, a war almost, 50 years ago. But I think that even today, it's as relevant as ever.
Yeah, I love the duality of this song. Um, First of all, it's an excellent album opener, and it just brings so much energy and life into this record, as we'll get into later. I love Bruce Springsteen's energy and his gravelly voice. For some people, a gravelly voice or like a really gritty voice might be a criticism, but it really just seems like down to earth and grounded, and just like he's completely giving his all on every song here.
It's very heartland and very sort of mainstream blue collar America. Tough. Persistent. Um, that's kind of his sound. He makes it work with makes it work well with the theme of his music.
Yeah, and the influence he's had on other artists is pretty incredible. I think one that comes to mind is the Killers. A lot of people will call them rip-offs of Bruce Springsteen, but that's one of my favorite bands ever, and they have directly stated that that's one of their biggest influences. And one of the things I also love about the song is we talked. I talked about this with my brother the other day about how this can sound like an odd comparison, but the band Paramore creates a lot of songs that are very upbeat and like very catchy and like exciting and fun. And then you actually listen to the lyrics and you're like, wow, this is like so depressing. And like it's kind of the same way here. You see the duality of the music. You see on like a production level and the instrumentation and the singing, it sounds really upbeat and exciting. I remember hearing this song at 4th of July parties and with fireworks going, like everybody drinking beer, going in their trucks, celebrating America. And when you actually listen to the lyrics, it's a really firm critique of the Vietnam War, and also, like you mentioned, veterans being neglected when they returned. And I think this is a very, very important song in the history of music and just in history in general. So, do you think there's any other way that you could have opened up this album besides Born in the USA, Ryan?
I don't really think so. I think that when you look at um, the messages of the album, which you've got you've got a couple of sort of heartbreak songs in there. You've got a couple of sort of feel good, just night out type of songs, and then you've got a couple of reflective, looking back on where you've come from, either in a positive way or in a longing type of way. Um, I think that a lot of those themes kind of coalesce and overlap really well in this opening track. So I think they really nailed it with this one. Regardless of the title, obviously, I think the message and the musical thematic of the opening track, I think, sets the tone really well for both sides of the album.
I completely agree. And it's interesting because my first impression of the song was, oh, it's just like it's whatever. It's one of his most popular songs. Not much to it. It's just celebrating the country. But I think the more I listen to it, the more I appreciate it, and I just love all the instrumentation, the production, as well as the message of the song too. So now that we've passed Born in the USA, the opening track, then we transition into Cover Me, which is the second track of the album.
So So Cover Me was actually one of the songs. You talk about songs that, when you first hear um, you first hear an album that don't really resonate with you as much in the beginning, but then you go back and give them a third or fourth listen, and all of a sudden you start to see um, the sort of beauty in the lyrics and in the song's construction. And Cover Me was that, from my vantage point. I had heard it 3 or 4 times going through Born in the USA and thought, oh, it's a good song, but it didn't really strike me as anything particularly special. I went back. It wasn't until I think 3 days ago actually that I went back and I was listening in preparation for today, and I actually thought, oh, this was a song that I actually quite enjoyed, and I liked the second verse in particular. Promise me, baby, you won't let them find us. Hold me in your arms, let's let our love blind us. Cover me, shut the door and cover me. Just that sense of protection and solace and security that one seeks in any relationship that they're in. And just that one sort of embraces with their partner. I thought that was kind of an interesting and just a really beautiful verse in terms of the preceding verse talking about how it's a rough world and tough times and just going through a lot from just from the world in general, and they're basically transition saying to say that as long as they have each other, they'll be safe and they'll get through it.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I think one of the most striking things was the instrumentation on the song. I know I already mentioned that in the opening track, but it's just such a catchy riff to open up the song, and I love the energy of the first couple tracks of the album. There's just so much passion and fervence in his voice, and this one's kind of more cool and laid back, I guess, compared to the other songs. But the guitar works great, and I love how it transitions from Born in the USA. As I mentioned earlier, the way that these tracks were lined up was just perfect. Couldn't have written it up any better. Um, yeah, this one's probably the most underrated track of the album for me. I didn't really have much to break down lyrically here, but I just think it's very groovy, very fun song to kind of transition from Born in the USA. And it's covering different material as well, so it doesn't feel redundant or repetitive.
Yeah, the message kind of has done a complete shape shift from the first track to the second one.
Definitely. So now that we've covered me, um, let's jump into track number 3, Darlington County. Darlington County.
Darlington County, I think, is one of those songs. It kind of reminds me of a song that I very much enjoy by another artist, Sammy Hagar. I Can't Drive 55. It kind of just reminds me, the music itself isn't necessarily particularly similar, but just the kind of song that you just want to put on, turn the volume up. If you have a convertible, you retract the roof and just go cruising down the highway and blasting the song. It just and that's basically what he talks about. There's not a whole lot of depth to the song, which I think is a nice contrast from the first two songs that had a lot of intensity to them, and a lot of just depth and sincerity. I think that he's kind of just talking about how it's at the end of sounds like it's at the end of a long week. He goes and with a friend of his on Independence Day, and they're just driving, going through and having a good time, and doing all these different things with their free time as guys. So I think that it's kind of a cool sort of offshoot from a very heavy first couple of tracks that resonate deeply. This is kind of something that you just more listen to when you're just looking to bop along a little bit and have put yourself kind of in cruise control, either literally or figuratively, and just have some good music to listen to get energized.
I think the first two tracks on this album have a lot to break down, lyrically and musically, and then this one's just fun. It's a nice little track here in the kind of the middle of side one. I love the intro, just like with Cover Me. Just completely sets the tone right away. I know some people with movies, they have a 15-minute rule where if you're not like engaged in the first 15 minutes, you turn it off. I know some people with music kind of have the same policy where it's like if you're not locked in the first like 10, 20 seconds of the song, you'll just skip it and move on to the next track. But this one's definitely not skippable. And another thing I really like here is, once again, Bruce Springsteen's vocals here. Look, he's not the greatest singer of all time. He's not a Stevie Nicks. He's not a Stevie Wonder. He's not a Mick Jagger. But he shows so much personality through his voice, and the vocals are so like they're very rough, but they're very rich.
If it wasn't Bruce Springsteen singing a Bruce Springsteen song, it would lose most of it. It would lose most of it. And I've heard people try and do covers of Bruce Springsteen songs, and it just you you can't replicate that just match between the voice, the music, the meaning, and his just style. It doesn't work for anybody else.
Definitely. And you've seen, like I said before, a lot of bands and a lot of artists have tried to replicate what Springsteen's done. Um, I mean, you can try, but you got to take a little bit of creative liberties here and there to get there. Uh, and also, I this is the first track on the album that really gives me a sense of nostalgia for a time I never grew up in a place I never grew up in. Um, I love the organs and like the synth. I think gives a very timeless feel, and it just kind of like it drops you into that like location and that time. And I grew up in I grew up in Irvine, so pretty well built up city. Um, it's a pretty nice area and stuff, and I didn't grow up in the 1980s or 1960s or any of those times, but I really just I feel like I'm there when I listen to the song. So now that we've covered Darlington County, let's just hop on over to the next track, which is Working on a Highway, which I have some similar thoughts on.
Um, Working on a highway for me is, pardon me, um, when you come into this track, it's like you said, it does have some similarities to Darlington County. It's like it's message of it's he leads in Friday night's pay night, guys fresh out of work talking about the weekend scrubbing off the dirt. So he's come in there. It kind of he does this with tracks in different albums as well, where he'll come in. One that kind of resonates with brings to mind is "Out in the Street" off of his River album. It's the message of it's the end of the week. It's been a hard week of work, 5 days of a 9 to 5, and then he's going in and just looking for um, talking about people who are looking to go home just for the weekend. And he talks about just the grueling physical, gruff, nose to the grindstone nature of his job, which I think it's a very symbolic reflection of his blue collar Americana style.
Yeah, I was thinking the same exact thing with the blue collar style. I like how down to earth his songs are on this album. It doesn't feel like it's like the celebrities singing Imagine, where it's just like, oh wow, we're struggling so much on our $20 million penthouse. He feels like he's like a common person, and that he's just relating his experiences. This is something that thousands and thousands of people have experienced, maybe millions. And this is another song where like I don't really have much to break down as far as the lyrics go, but it's very easy to sing along to and clap along to. And once again, it feels very similar to Darlington County. It feels like these two are like perfectly matched to go back to back on this album. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't really have much else to say on Working on Highway. So might as well jump into the fifth track here with Downbound Train.
Oh, I absolutely loved this track. This is definitely one of my favorites off of Born in the USA. Um, he and I don't know exactly how to because my words can't do it justice. You have to actually listen to it to get this. But I just when I turn the song on and I hit play, I feel like I'm on a train ride when the music starts when the music comes on. It I feel like I'm on this downbound train that he's asking the listener if he can understand this. A feeling of you being a rider on a downbound train. I can feel myself being put into that situation by the lyrics and by the music that's backing it. Um, he talks about how he had a job, he had a relationship, and things were going well. And then almost overnight, he lost everything, and now he's just grinding to kind of make something of himself. And the this is I think this is one of two songs. I'll mention the other one later on, but this is one of two songs on this album where I think that the music and the lyrics, the specific music and lyrics of the song, just work together so perfectly. And it's like a journey of the music that is just it's kind of directed and the holes are kind of filled in by the lyrics. You kind of you're going somewhere when the music comes on, and you find out exactly where when the lyrics start to play.
I totally agree. We were talking about how Born in the USA kind of has that duality of the music where the message and the presentation of the song are different, but this song is very cohesive. And like you were saying, I think the word I was trying to bring up earlier was immersive. I think a lot of the tracks on this album are very immersive, and his storytelling here is really impressive. I think one of my favorite lines on the entire album was, "She bought a ticket on the Central Line. Nights as I sleep, I hear that whistle whining. I feel her kiss in the misty rain, and I feel like I'm a rider on a downbound train." That's just beautiful. And I like how it kind of slows down the pace of the album because it feels like we're just going at 100 miles per hour for the first four tracks in the album. And then this sets it up really well for the next track that we're going to talk about in a second. Once again, perfect sequencing on the album. Yeah, it's one of the first. I think it's probably one of the few songs of the album that is more like somber and reflective. But I think it's really important to have it in the album.
Definitely, and I think where it's placed to kind of work as a transition between the first four, like you said, that have a lot of pace and a lot of um, tempo and a lot of action within the songs. I think it's transitioned into the song that I actually just alluded to in our, which we'll talk about the very next one on to wrap up side one. I think that it was a perfect segue choice.
Yeah, and we might as well jump into it right now. So the last track on side one is "I'm on Fire."
Hey, little
Um,
girl, is your daddy home? Did he go and leave you all alone? So I mentioned when discussing Downbound Train that there was that there was this was one of it was one of two songs that I felt the music and the lyrics just couldn't have worked better and more perfectly with one another as components to make the song work. And I'm on Fire was the other one I was referring to, and I have this unique feeling that just when you put on I'm on fire and there's a gap. There's not a ton of lyrics in the song. It's predominantly instrumental with some lyrics sprinkled out in between the middle, where there's really only two pieces of lyrical component. And when you turn on the song and it starts to play the beginning musical piece, there's this energy of that sort of romantic passion intensity that the very low volume but very steadily paced music, it kind of lends itself to start to warm up to some of those feelings that you can just kind of feel them bubbling beneath the surface at the part and you or at that point, and you can feel them just about to explode when he starts to get into the actual lyrics of what he communicates. And it's definitely if it's not my favorite on this album across the board, it's in the top two. It's one of my favorite Bruce songs.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said there. I think it's definitely the most subtle song on the album. Probably one of the more subtle songs that Bruce has put out over the years. I think the two things that I was impressed with the most is I like the faint organ you can hear in the background. It just feels like it's just so soft that like you might not even notice it on your first time listening to it, but it's there, and it makes a big difference. And I like the light drum work too. Um, Everything is just very subdued, but in a good way.
I I absolutely love his the last bit of lyrics that he um, included in the song. I when he comes in, he's done um, his first "I'm on Fire" and the chorus, and then he comes in. It's his only like actual full verse in the song. And he goes, sometimes it's like a knife. Sometimes it's like someone took a knife, baby, edgy and dull, and cut a 6-inch valley through the middle of my skull. At night I wake up with the sheets soaking wet and a freight train running through the middle of my head. Only you can cool my desire. I just the raw passion in those lyrics, of that many people can relate to, having felt had those those nights and those feelings for somebody. It's just really the imagery of it works so perfectly with the way that the song progresses from an instrumental standpoint.
Yeah, I had that in my notes too. I was just about to mention that. Even though it's not the most heavy song lyrically, there's definitely some stuff to break down there. And also, I love his vocal performance here. I was mentioning earlier how some of the songs in this album, it sounds like he's singing so intensely and like giving it his complete all to the point where he can barely even get the words out. And this song, it's almost like a whisper, especially in comparison to. And I think this is just like the perfect song to listen to if you're like drowsing off trying to go to sleep, or if you're like taking a drive at nighttime, like while the sunset's going down. It's just all that imagery just kind of comes into my head.
I actually didn't like this song when I first heard it. Fun fact: I listened to it and I thought there's not really a lot that's interesting to me about this song. That like it I thought, wow, he went from, Born in the USA to Cover Me to, Downbound Train to this. I was surprised. But it was another song that, by the third or fourth time I was hooked, and it became a favorite really quickly.
Yeah, I had the same experience too. First time I listened to it, I was like, "Can you like speak up a little bit? Can't really hear you." But yeah, I like it a lot. I wouldn't say it's maybe my favorite on the album or top three, but it's definitely up there. And that wraps up side one. So I tried this last time on the last episode. So what was your favorite album or favorite track from the album on side one?
On side one, I got to go with the one that we just finished. I'm on Fire would definitely be my favorite on this side, but there's side one of this, and I a couple months ago I actually bought for the first time. I bought myself a Victrola, and I had this was one of the first records that I bought myself for this one, and I had listened to side one straight through, and whenever, no matter what day it was, no matter what happened, while I was at school, no matter, how things were going academically, so there was always one song from this side that I could put on, and it was exactly what I wanted to hear at that time, regardless of what was going on. And I think it just shows how diverse and different his work was throughout this side. You started with, the anti-war sort of reflection of, the hardships that returning veterans faced, and then you end with this remarkably intense, sneaky, kind of bubbling beneath the surface energy love song of just raw passion. There's so much happening in just 6 tracks. But for me, if I had to choose one, it would be "I'm on Fire."
Yeah, I have a tough time choosing between Born in the USA and Cover Me personally. Uh, I think Cover Me is just ridiculously catchy and super fun to listen to. But I think I got to give Born in the USA the edge by just the slightest of margins, just because of how important I think the message of the song is, and how much fun the song is also. I mean, you could play it at a fireworks show and like at a party and just enjoy the song, or you could play it in your room in the dark and just like reflect on the state of the country. So I really enjoy this first half of the album. Like you said, it's just there's so much that's happening on the first half here that I mean you don't even really need a second half, but the second half's great too. So without further ado, let's go into side two, and the first track there is No Surrender.
So "No Surrender" was kind of a fun. It's like a teenage type, kind of blinded by the light vibes here a little bit. Kind of coming out of the sort of the teenager mentality of the stereotypes of cutting class and getting into trouble and out, sort of the bad boy imagery. And then you kind of start to hear the sort of slowing down and the settling down and getting serious. And he says, we made a promise we swore we'd always remember: no retreat, baby, no surrender. He he's gone through his fun time, and he wants to hunker down now, and he wants to move forward with a more focused uh, lifestyle.
Definitely. I'm gonna mention transitions so many times in this episode. We'll do yeah. We'll do a little drinking game. Every time I mention any time I mention transitions, take a shot. You'll be absolutely hammered by the end of the episode. Anyway, I love how I'm on Fire transitions into No Surrender, because this completely reinvigorates the energy of the album. It just brings you back to the first few tracks as far as the energy. Um, I guess a good comparison here is when you're listening to Tusk, like we mentioned a couple weeks ago, and then you hear Sarah, and it's like very like relaxing and soothing, and then all of a sudden they hit you with What Makes You Think You're the One. Or even earlier in the album when you start with Over and Over, which is very like melodic song, and then they just completely slap you in the face with The Ledge. I love it when albums can have like that like spark that like keeps things going in the second half of the album, I guess.
Yes, they kind of keep you on your toes a little bit. It's like
Exactly.
we're both baseball fans. It's like when you're getting kind of comfortable with the way that they're pitching you, so they throw you one up and in to just make sure you're staying awake.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a perfect comparison. And we'll talk about baseball a little later too.
Maybe a track about it. And also on No Surrender, I feel like it's worth mentioning the harmonies in this track are so good. I'm gonna use a really pretentious word here. The harmonies are sublime. I'm sorry I had to go there, but I felt like it was needed. I needed to say it. I think this is probably one of my favorite tracks on the album as well. The production on here is very, very solid. There's a lot of songs on here that are well produced and well put together, but you could really hear like the space between the instrumentals and the voice. And yeah, I think it's a great way to open up the second half of the album. So then we got Bobby Jean, which is another great track, which we're going to talk about next.
Um, you talk about tracks that I can actually resonate with from a personal standpoint. There's two of them that are both on side two, actually. And this was definitely one of them. I think anybody who has had someone who was in their life for a period of time that they were extremely close with, borderline inseparable, regardless of gender, and that they made a lot of really great memories, and just that was like your go-to person, and then all of a sudden they you find out that they're relocating, and that you're kind of going to be moving on in different locations, kind of with no prior knowledge, and with no preparation. It's a real shock. It's a real difficult experience. That it's a transition that a lot of people have a difficult time with, and that he kind of talks about his this person that he's referring to, how he wishes he could have spoken to them one last time. He wishes he could have just had an opportunity to really um, just say goodbye, and is reflecting on how when he didn't really feel like he fit in with anybody else, he felt like he and this person had something special, even in a non-romantic sense. And that's something that I can very much relate to, after a very close friend of mine, in the end of middle school, had relocated to New York City. So this song actually had a lot of personal connection for me in the beginning of high school as well. So yeah, Bobby Jean, I have a lot of there's a lot of special and meaningful components to it.
Man, this song, I feel this song on a spiritual level. Um, in the movie Blinded by the Light, I know we both saw it somewhat recently. It's it's about how like Bruce kind of like feels what we felt, like the main character in that movie feels like Bruce is speaking to him. This is that song for me. Um, I love the line, "Me and you, we've known each other, yeah, ever since we were 16. I wish I would have known. I wish I would have called you just to say goodbye, Bobby Jean." And this Bobby Jean in my life has just been like many different people, and especially now that I'm in college, and a lot of my friends are moving because of COVID-19. A lot of people are going back home, um, who didn't live in Irvine, who I was friends with. So it just feels like, man, I wish I could just say goodbye again. And it's a super fun song. It's very upbeat and catchy, but also like it's kind of depressing when you think about it.
What do you think
It
about
is. It's one of those songs that, like you mentioned earlier, where just the upbeat level of the music, like unless you really listen to the lyrics really closely, you really catch on to the fact about how, wow, this is really uh,
tragic?
difficult. It's not, the music is in um, very artistic and very masterful contrast to what the lyrics are actually saying.
Definitely, I think "Landslide" by Fleetwood Mac was definitely a song that I resonated with last year, and I feel like Bobby Jean is definitely how I'm feeling right now, especially with yeah, everything's shifting. A lot of people are kind of separated uh, because of the pandemic, so it's really hard. And I feel like this is like a free form of therapy listening to this song. So, and I was surprised. I actually didn't really listen to the song that often until the last week or so, when everything was changing around me, and I felt like I was like I didn't have any control over what was happening, and it just really resonated with me. And I think this is definitely one of the stronger tracks to the side too as well. So this next track here, is one that I'm not particularly fond of, but I'm curious what you think about it, and that's "I'm Going Down."
I'm actually going to repeat something that you said about Bobby Jean. You used the phrase, which I found interesting, free form of therapy, and that's how I felt about "I'm Going Down." A few months ago, I went through my first breakup, and I this song I'm Going Down just has so many lyrics that I resonated with going through that, um, and having that experience. And I had just I would go into my dorm when I had I mentioned that record player that I had gotten, and I'll go on and I'll listen to I would deliberately go to this track specifically, and I just the particularly the second verse. We get dressed up and we go out, baby, for the night. We come home early, burning in some firefight. I'm sick and tired of you setting me up just to knocking me down. And I think that the just the every um, you know verse of this song, there's different examples, very distinct examples of those kind of moments in a relationship where you can tell that things are not working out, but you're kind of still in that transition where it hasn't really hit you yet and you're still trying to make it work. And I think that this is a song that I think has if I had done those things that are online now where you can like look at what songs you've most played during like COVID-19 or during quarantine. I think if you looked from October to January, I think if you looked at my top 10 played songs on Spotify, I think this would definitely be in my top two or three. I was listening to this a lot during that period of time, and it's a really therapeutic and very it's a tough but it's a resonant and very appropriate sort of transitional song when you're kind of in that come down in that situation that everybody's going to go through at one point or another.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I didn't really consider it from that point of view. I need my heart to be broken so I can appreciate these songs more. No, I when I said I wasn't particularly fond of it, I feel like that may have been a little intense. I would just say it's maybe the one track on the album that I wouldn't have a glowing review for. It just, it's there. It's not bad. I One thing I do love is I love the sax solo. I'm a sucker for a saxophone solo in any band, any song. Especially when the Beatles try it out in Chicago. That's just some good stuff. But yeah, I like. All right, take a shot here. I like the transition from Bobby Jean. It's very well placed in the album. I feel like there isn't really anywhere else you could put it. And man, that's kind of all I got to say about I'm Going Down.
Well, let's play. It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Exactly. So now let's dive into Glory Days, which we're talking about baseball earlier. Now we get to talk about it now.
Oh yeah. So Glory Days, I think anybody who has, played baseball in particular, which I'm very blessed to say that that's a group that includes me for one season. But I think even from a non-athletic standpoint, this is just a very interesting, reflective song about somebody who is just in a different transition of or a different stage of his life, more advanced stage of his life, and is kind of looking back on what got him there, and urging people who are still in that stage of their lives to cherish those moments as they're in them, and to it reminds me, I've made a lot of comparisons. You've made a lot of transitions. I've made a lot of comparisons. Reminds me of another song. I'm not sure if any country music fans are listening to this, but if you've ever heard Kenny Chesney's "Don't Blink," it's very similar to that, where it kind of just talks about how life is going to go by fast, so appreciate the great times that you have, no matter how small as they're happening, because we all only have, so many of those.
Completely agree. This is, once again, I'm going to use the word. I should make like multiple drinking games for this episode. Nostalgia. It just makes me like reflect a lot on like a different time in my life, um, a time before um, a time before college, and everything's changed. Just talking about, I mean, this song I always connect with baseball. My baseball experience playing baseball for like 10 years, and I remember hearing this at a bunch of ballparks, and a bunch of games that I've been to, and like MLB Network and stuff. So it's really connected to a lot of my memories. I wouldn't really say it's out of the singles on this album. I'd say it's probably maybe in the lower tier, but I still very much enjoy it. I love the organ in this song, and yeah, it's just very nostalgic. Look back at life, and you can't go wrong with baseball and Bruce Springsteen. But now is the moment we've all been waiting for. Or I mean, the moment I've been waiting for. This is. Don't even get me started on the song, "Dancing in the Dark."
This has to be. You haven't even asked the question. I'm gonna say it right now. This is easily as much as as highly as I've spoken about the last three songs. This is easily my favorite song on side two. Dancing in the Dark is one of my three or four favorite Bruce songs ever. And I just as soon as it comes on, I have the urge to get up and dance, and then I have to look around and make sure nobody's around me so that they don't get scarred. But uh, but I absolutely love this song, and I don't know if you've seen the video of this song where Courtney Cox was goes up on stage and dances. um, but I just that video is just an iconic. It's it's something that it's not just like there's some songs, every musician has those songs that are part of like their history and their discography, and then there are just some that are just part of something greater than that. I just think Dancing in the Dark is just one of those Bruce songs that goes far beyond him. It's part of American music history, and it has a lot of um, before you even get to the individual music components to it. I get up in the evening and I ain't got nothing to say. I come home in the morning. I go to bed feeling the same way. I'm nothing but tired, but honey, I'm just tired and bored with myself. Hey there, baby, I could just use a little help. That sort of opening verse, and then he just kills it on the chorus. You can't start a fire. You can't start a fire without a spark. Um, and then he wraps it up with hey baby, I'm just dancing in the dark. Um, and I the um, the just the interlude into that, and then just the way that he belts out the chorus, and but just you could hear almost the tone in his voice where he's like laughing and like dancing while he's singing at the same time. And you can just hear the excitement and just the energy and just wanting to just go all out and just have a good time. And it's just an absolutely fantastic piece of music, and it's one that I absolutely. This is one of those songs we talked earlier. This is one of those songs that I honestly could play on repeat, and it wouldn't sour it for me. I just there's too much depth and too much fun in the song. It's just a fun piece of music that it doesn't get old for me.
Yeah, this isn't the kind of song you could just like stand up straight like a pencil and just like sing at an open net mic night. You gotta like dance around. You gotta groove. Uh, this is easily my favorite song on the album. I think it's neck and neck with "Born to Run" to be my favorite Bruce song. This is just like an expertly crafted song, like in every sense of the word. It's also very transcendent. Um, I mean, he's singing about personal experience, but I feel like anybody can relate to it on a certain level. And he sings the song with such pathos, so it feels like he's like directly speaking to you, like we kind of talked about earlier. And another note here I had: how can you not dance to the song? Never gets old. I feel like I'm kind of echoing a lot of the statements you said here. And it's just, I feel like it's especially prevalent during quarantine. I was looking up the line, man, I ain't getting nowhere. I'm just living in a dump like this. There's something happening somewhere, baby. I just know that there is. And if that doesn't sum up how I feel right now, I don't know what does. Can't really say I'm living in a dump per se, but I just there's stuff going out in the world, but I'm just stuck inside and I can't move. I feel kind of trapped. So this song feels like it was kind of speaking to me as well.
I'm getting chills right now just talking about the song. There's so I'm probably literally gonna, as soon as my mom gets home, I'm probably gonna put on Blinded by the Light now. But there's just
Yeah,
um, but and it's one of those songs that you can play. You mentioned this earlier. It's one of those songs that you can just play in any situation. You can play it, at home, when
maybe
you're just
not like a funeral or something, but
right. But okay.
I don't know why I went there.
Always got the edge cases, but you can put it on, in the car. You can put it on at home, out in the yard. It's such a great and such a universally uh, just positive and uplifting song.
Spirited too.
Yes,
That's another word I was
yeah,
thinking of.
spirited. That's a good one.
It's kind of like last week I discussed Abbey Road, my favorite Beatles record, and Golden Slumbers. I just went on like a whole rant, and I just didn't really have words by the end of it. Kind of feel the same way here. It's definitely one of my favorites, and I love the energy in which he sings it. I love the lyrics, the content, story. Even if you didn't grow up in a small town, I feel like you can definitely take parts of this song into your experience and just, like I said, feel it on a spiritual level. And now that we got that bop out of the way, then we go into the last track on this album, which is super sad, and that's My Hometown.
Like I mentioned in the beginning, I couldn't have chosen a better song, perhaps in his whole discography, to close this specific
Take a
album.
shot, guys. Take a shot.
The
Track listing.
the whole just the one line, he'd tussle my hair and say, "Son, take a good look around. This is your hometown." And that, if you don't hear or don't really tune into the lyrics before and after that, you can take that can be so ambiguous, and it can be, a sense of pride. It could be a sense of, nostalgia. A sense of, oh, there's another one. A sense of reflection. There's any number of ways that can be interpreted, but if you go into, the second verse, it's clear that he's talking about a very difficult and combative environment that existed in the area in which they lived, and it became a situation later in the song. He kind of does a time lapse, and he says, "I'm 35. We've got a boy of our own now. Last night I sat him up behind the wheel and said, 'Son, take a good look around. This is your hometown.'" So everything this song comes full circle the same way in a similar way to how the album comes full circle, where you're kind of talking about um, that sort of difficulty and sense of having to persevere through adversity and excuse me, and in a very different way, but similar undertones to Born in the USA, where we talked about, the trials and tribulations that veterans returning faced, and I think that the ability to have that, it's just an undercurrent, sort of moral, that ties in a lot of Bruce music, where it's, you're going through it, you're having these unprecedented difficult circumstances, and you're always trying to do what you have to do to just get through and make the best out of it that you can. And I think that my hometown, and just the musical component of it as well. Like, we talked about the contrasting tempos and music at different times. This compared to Dancing in the Dark, I can't think of a song that contrasts Dancing in the Dark, a very lively, upbeat dancing, um, positive, sort of light song, um, to transition into something that's so um, personal, so reflective, so gritty, so um, gravelly, and it makes me think of just like Heartland Hardship, which defines Bruce, but and particularly this record. Um, it's a very fitting way to conclude, and I think that the it's a song that I think maybe gets um, doesn't get as much attention as ones like maybe Bobby Jean or Born in the USA or Dancing in the Dark. Um, but I definitely think that and it talks about how, if you look to some of the backstory of the song, it talks about how it's a fictional, um, it's based on, or it's a fictional events, but they were inspired by actual occurrences that happened in yeah, his early years, growing up in Freehold, which is about just a short drive away from where I currently go to school. And it's just very um, it's very real. It's very authentic. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people love about Bruce. His music is very authentic. He's not putting on something like pop type. He's not putting on something to get listens or to get sales, or all these things. He's not. There's no persona there. It's real American human difficulty that everyday people can resonate with.
Yeah, you said it perfectly there. Authentic. I think that's the one word I would use to describe this album. And I'm not gonna pretend like I'm the biggest Bruce Springsteen fan ever. I mean, I've only listened to this album and Born to Run extensively, but from what I've heard, I love how genuine his songs are. And this last track, My Hometown, it's very slow and melodic end to the album. Maybe not what you'd expect to when you hear all these uplifting, exciting songs, and then you end it with kind of like a reflection on everything. And this song also covers a lot of ground. It starts talking about prejudice and racism in his hometown, and tension between different groups of people. Also talking about vacant stores, people struggling to find jobs, and at the end he says, that's where he's going to raise his son. He's not like getting out. I think it's very subversive as far as that story would go, because you'd expect it to be discussing how the hometown had a lot of issues and that he has to leave and get out. But instead, he's kind of admitting that this is his life. This is where he may spend the rest of his life as well. Uh, that kind of adds to why it's a very depressing way to end the album, but not one that's needlessly sad, but one that's very like raw and real. So now that we've covered all the track by track songs on this album, first let's talk about our favorite track on the second side of the album, which I think we could both agree is Dancing in the Dark.
I would definitely agree with that. My favorite would definitely be Dancing in the Dark. You talk about one that I perhaps resonated most with. That would probably be "I'm Going Down" rather than because I think that you can enjoy a song, but it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily synonymous with it being the one that you connect most with. If I connected most with a song, it would be "I'm Going Down." But I think from a song that I would go to turn on to just have a song that I wanted to hear and wanted to just immerse myself in. Definitely, you can't go wrong with "Dancing in the Dark." It's iconic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the content from My Hometown, but that's not really the song I'd be listening to on like a Saturday night when I'm about to go see my friends. So I would definitely say Dancing in the Dark is my favorite track on the second side of the album. Maybe my favorite track of his overall. And then I'd say Bobby Jean is probably the one right now that connects the most with me. So now that we've discussed all that and covered a lot of ground here, what are your overall thoughts on the album as a whole?
The album as a whole, I think that the message of Born in the USA, I find it interesting how, looking at, um, you look into some of the history of the title track in particular, but the album itself, that people hear "Born in the USA" and they think, oh, it's patriotism, it's loving America, and there is elements of that in his music, but it's very different than some of he actually has said a couple times that certain politicians have tried to use "Born in the USA" at like rallies and events and such, um, and he has been critical of that, whether it's for political reasons or just because he doesn't. And he says, I question how closely people actually listen to the song sometimes when I see the way that it's being used, um, which I found interesting. And then, um, but I think when I think of Bruce Springsteen, I think of I mentioned the word authenticity. I think of just American working life, like the lives of working everyday Americans, and I think of persevering through circumstances in life. And he has another album that really dives into that, which is called, or a couple albums that really dive into that, that came out later, that I particularly liked. But since we're just talking about this one, I think that the synopsis of and the summation of his those themes in his music, I think are really explored very um, in a very captivating way in this record. And I think that it's easy to to say, oh well, you got Born in the USA, you got Dancing in the Dark. Those were the hits. Those are the ones that every Bruce fan knows, and a lot of non-Bruce fans know. Um, but I think if you look at ones like Downbound Train and ones like My Hometown, and a couple of the I'll call them filler tracks, not to be disrespectful, but just ones that aren't as well known necessarily. Um, I think that there's some really intelligent and really um, resonant, and just ones that people, even you and I, who weren't even a thought when this record was released, can relate to and can see, can witness from a distance other people relating to.
Yeah, well said. I completely agree with everything you said there. Um, I think the word that came to mind, especially with the last thing or the last line you were saying, was timelessness. I think this is one of the more timeless classic rock albums. And I mean, to be honest, I went into this not really knowing much about Bruce Springsteen, but I ended up listening to the album, listening to a little bit of his other work, and watching Blind by the Light. And I found a newfound appreciation for him. And I'm really glad we covered this album here, because I felt like I was kind of in my element for the Tusk review and Abbey Road review, because those are albums that I love and that I listen to daily. But with this one, it was a nice exploration into a different aspect of rock and roll, and I went in with the idea that I wasn't a huge fan of the '80s as an era for music, and that I liked kind of like the hits and not the albums. But I really appreciate the complete scope of the album, and this is one last shot for you guys to take. The track listing. The track listing in this album is ridiculously good. The pace is perfect. I wouldn't have placed any other song differently. I'm going to bring up Fleetwood Mac again. With the album Rumors, it's one of my favorites of all time, but I feel like the way that they sequenced the songs didn't really make sense, and it sounded more like a compilation, like a greatest hits album, more than like an actual like cohesive story. But with this one, it's just everything kind of blends together very well. But you got some distinctive tracks on here, so I was very impressed with Born in the USA, and I think it's got to be one of the better albums of the 1980s, and one that any classic rock fan should listen to.
It definitely works, I'll throw in one more thing as um I talk about how people ask me all the time, who's your favorite singer right now, who's your and you and I both know that anybody who loves music as much as we do, their favorite song or singer on in the moment on any given day is going to change day to day, week to week. Um, all time, I have yet to hear an artist whose music, whose personal story, and whose just general body of work as a musician, connecting with who they were as a person, resonated with me more than Bruce Springsteen. He is my single favorite musician of all time, and this is an absolutely magnificent collection that he did, and that he and just the way that it all weaves together from track to track, um, from a lyrical standpoint, from a message standpoint, right down to the tempo and the instrumental flow. Um, it's a work of art. It really is. There's no other way to put it. It's an authentic work of art that roots itself in matters that any individual growing up in this country can find some connection to at some point.
You said it better than I could have. Yeah, that's our review of Born in the USA. Great album. Hope you guys enjoyed this review, and hope you guys will enjoy listening to the album as well, if you haven't before. And thank you, Ryan, for being on for this episode.
Thanks for having me, bud. Stay well, everybody.
And it looks like we're going to have a lot of exciting episodes coming up. Next episode, we're going to be talking about Billy Joel, with one of my favorite albums of all time, The Stranger. And then we got a bunch of other bands that we're kind of in the process of cutting down the list and seeing which ones we're going to cover for the rest of quote-unquote season 1. So stay tuned for that. And you can see updates on my Instagram and my Twitter. And yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.